Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The storm struck the mountain village with biblical fury, transforming gentle brooks into torrential rivers and sending winds screaming through valleys like banshees. Ethan Caldwell's knuckles whitened against his Mercedes steering wheel, his tailored suit clinging to skin slick with perspiration as he fought to control the vehicle on roads that snaked treacherously through absolute darkness. This detour had been a catastrophic mistake, with the main highway flooded. His GPS had guided him into these forgotten hills, where civilization flickered weakly in scattered windows. Each lightning flash revealed the landscape in bone-white terror before abandoning him to blindness again. The accident happened in an instant. A tree, ancient and massive, crashed across the narrow road just as Ethan rounded a sharp curve. His Mercedes spun wildly, the world becoming a kaleidoscope of headlights, rain, and terror before the vehicle slammed into a boulder with the sickening sound of metal crushing against stone. The last thing Ethan remembered was the taste of blood on his lips and the strange peace that settled over him as consciousness fled. Darkness claimed him completely, but it was not the end. It was the beginning of everything. When awareness began to return, it came in gentle waves, like a tide of consciousness washing over the shores of his mind. Soft hands touched his forehead with the tenderness of a mother caring for her child, and a voice, like honey mixed with starlight, sang something beautiful in a language he didn't recognize. The melody wrapped around him like a healing balm, pulling him back from whatever abyss had claimed him. "Shh, Angel, you're safe now," the voice whispered. And Ethan's eyes fluttered open to behold a vision that made him question whether he had crossed over into another realm entirely. Lila Thompson knelt beside the small bed where she had placed him, and Ethan's breath caught in his throat. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, not the artificial beauty of the models and socialites who populated his usual world, but something deeper, more profound. Her ebony skin glowed in the candlelight, like polished obsidian kissed by fire, her dark eyes holding depths of compassion that seemed to see directly into his soul. Her hair fell in natural curls around her shoulders, and when she smiled, it was like watching the sun emerge from behind storm clouds. "Am I dead?" Ethan whispered, his voice broken from the accident. Lila's laugh was like music itself, soft and melodious, filling the small room with warmth, very much alive. "Though you gave me quite a scare when I found you. Your car is wrapped around that old boulder on Harper's Curve. I've been praying over you for 3 hours, wondering if you'd ever open those eyes." The room around him was humble but immaculate, filled with handmade quilts, dried herbs hanging from wooden beams, and the kind of simple beauty that spoke of a life lived with intention and grace. Candles provided the only light, their flames dancing in the gentle breeze that whispered through cracks in the wooden walls. It was a world away from his penthouse apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and modern emptiness. "You brought me here." Ethan attempted to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. "Lie still," Lila commanded gently, her hands pressing him back against the soft pillows. "You have 3 cracked ribs, a concussion, and more cuts and bruises than I care to count. But you're alive, and that's what matters." For 3 days, Ethan existed in a world he had never known could exist. Lila tended to him with a skill that seemed part medicine, part magic. Her touch was healing itself. She cleaned his wounds with herbs that seemed to knit his skin back together, fed him broths made from vegetables grown in her own garden, and sang to him when fever made him restless and pain made him cry out in his sleep. "You don't know me," Ethan said on the second night, when consciousness came more clearly, and he could truly appreciate the magnitude of what this stranger was doing for him. "I could be a dangerous criminal. Why are you risking everything to help me?" Lila looked up from the small fire where she was brewing something that smelled of healing and hope. In the flickering light, she looked like something out of an ancient story, a goddess of mercy, a saint of compassion, an angel walking among mortals. "Because you needed help," she said simply, her voice carrying the weight of absolute truth. "And because when I found you bleeding in that wreckage, something in my heart recognized something in yours. We're not strangers, Ethan Caldwell. We're souls that have been searching for each other across time and space." The way she said his name, she had found his wallet and learned his identity, made something deep in his chest flutter and soar. No one had ever spoken his name with such tenderness, such recognition of who he truly was beneath the expensive suits, corporate power, and lonely success that defined his existence. She told him about her life as she cared for him, how she had learned healing from her grandmother, how she grew medicinal herbs in the garden behind her small house, how she had never married, because she had been waiting for something, someone, though she hadn't understood what, until she found him broken and bleeding in the storm. Ethan shared his own story, the loneliness of wealth, the emptiness of success without love, the way he had built walls around his heart so high that no one had ever been able to scale them until now. Until here. On the third night, as gentle rain drummed against the windows and candles cast dancing shadows on the walls, the space between them seemed to disappear entirely. Ethan reached for her hand, and the touch sent electricity through both of them, a recognition that went deeper than flesh, deeper than thought, straight to the core of who they were. "Lila," he whispered, and she came to him like she'd been waiting her entire life for this moment, like every breath she had ever taken had been leading to this instant when their souls would finally recognize each other. Their coming together was not merely physical. It was spiritual, emotional, a recognition of two halves of the same whole, finally becoming complete. In her arms, Ethan found the home he had been searching for without even knowing he was lost. In his embrace, Lila discovered a love so profound and true that it felt like destiny itself had reached down to touch their lives. They moved together like dancers who had rehearsed this choreography, in dreams each touch a revelation, each kiss a promise, each whispered endearment, a vow that transcended the temporary nature of their physical existence. "I love you," Ethan whispered against her hair as dawn approached, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. "I don't understand how or why, but I love you with everything I am, everything I have ever been, everything I will ever become." "And I love you," Lila replied, tears of pure joy streaming down her cheeks like liquid diamonds. "From the moment I saw you broken and bleeding, I knew you were my heart's missing piece, the other half of my soul." As the sun rose, casting their small sanctuary in light that seemed to bless their union, Ethan made a vow that would echo through the years to come. "I'll come back for you, my angel. Nothing in this world, not distance, not time, not circumstance will keep me from returning to claim the love we've found." But fate, cruel and unforgiving, was already weaving a tapestry of separation that would test their love beyond all human endurance. Chapter 2. The Cruel Hand of Fate. Dawn broke over the mountain village like a promise of new beginnings, painting the sky in soft pastels that seemed to bless the love that had bloomed in the darkness of the storm. Ethan dressed slowly, his body still aching from the accident, but his heart soaring with a joy he had never experienced before. Every movement reminded him of Lila's gentle hands healing his wounds, her soft lips against his skin, her whispered declarations of love that had transformed his very soul. Lila stood by the small window, wrapped in a simple white dress that made her look like an earthbound angel. The morning light caught the tears on her cheeks, tears of joy, mixed with the inevitable sorrow of temporary parting. "This isn't goodbye," Ethan said, pulling her into his arms one last time, breathing in the scent of herbs and flowers that always surrounded her. "I'll be back within a week. I just need to handle some business in the city, and then nothing will ever separate us again." "I know," Lila whispered, though her heart felt like it was breaking even as it overflowed with love. "But promise me something, Ethan. Promise me that no matter what happens, no matter how long it takes, you'll remember this moment. Remember how we love each other." "How could I forget?" Ethan cupped her face in his hands, memorizing every beautiful feature. "You've saved me, Lila, no, just from the accident, but from a life without meaning. I love you more than I have words to express." Their final kiss tasted of tears and promises, and a love so pure it seemed to stop time itself. Ethan climbed into the rental car the tow truck driver had brought for him, carrying with him an address written in her elegant handwriting, her kiss still warm on his lips, and a heart so full of love he could barely contain it. But fate, merciless and cruel, was already weaving a web of circumstances that would tear them apart. The emergency call came as Ethan descended the mountain, his phone finally receiving a signal after days of blessed disconnection from the outside world. His assistant's frantic voice cut through his joy like a blade through silk. "Mr. Caldwell. Thank God. We've been trying to reach you for 3 days. It's your father. He's had a massive heart attack. The doctors say it's touch and go, and the Shanghai deal's falling apart without you here. The board is in panic mode. You need to get on a plane immediately." The next hours passed in a blur of desperate activity. Ethan's father, the man who had built their business empire from nothing, lay in intensive care, fighting for his life. The multi-million-dollar deal that would determine the company's future was crumbling without Ethan's presence. In the chaos of hospital visits, emergency board meetings, and frantic negotiations, Ethan's briefcase, containing Lila's address, was lost in the shuffle of papers and panic. "I'll find it," he told himself desperately, as he searched through his belongings between his father's bedside and the boardroom. "I'll call information. I'll hire someone to find her." But the mountain village was so remote it barely appeared on maps, and Ethan realized with growing horror that he didn't even know Lila's last name with certainty. He had been too lost in love to ask the practical questions that would have allowed him to find her again. Days turned into weeks as his father's condition remained critical and the business crisis deepened. Ethan hired private investigators, called every information service he could find, even drove back to the mountains himself, but the storm had washed out roads and changed the landscape. The small house where he had found love seemed to have vanished like something from a dream. Meanwhile, in her mountain sanctuary, Lila waited. Days passed, then weeks, and still no word from the man who had promised to return for her. But she held faith in her heart, tending her garden and her healing practice, knowing that love as profound as theirs could not simply disappear. It was 6 weeks after Ethan's departure that Lila first noticed the changes in her body. The morning sickness came like a gentle whisper at first, then stronger, more insistent. When Dr. Bennett from the next valley confirmed what her heart already knew, Lila fell to her knees in her garden, tears of joy and terror streaming down her face. She was carrying Ethan's child, a baby conceived in love so pure it had created new life from the miracle of their union. For weeks, Lila kept her condition secret, her hands instinctively protecting the tiny life growing within her. She wrote letters to Ethan, not knowing where to send them, pouring her heart onto paper that would never reach its destination. She sang lullabies to her unborn child and dreamed of the day when Ethan would return to find he was going to be a father. But secrets in small villages have a way of revealing themselves, and it was Clara Jenkins, the village gossip, who first noticed Lila's condition and wasted no time spreading the news. "That Thompson girl has gotten herself in trouble," Clara whispered to anyone who would listen. "Unmarried and pregnant, and she won't say who the father is. Probably some traveling salesman who took advantage of her kindness." The whispers grew into murmurs, the murmurs into accusations, and the accusations into a storm of judgment that would destroy everything Lila held dear. Elder Grayson, the village's self-appointed moral authority, was a man whose heart had been hardened by years of self-righteousness and bitter loneliness. He had always resented Lila's independence, her refusal to bow to his attempts at courtship, her ability to heal people when he could only condemn them. When news of her pregnancy reached him, he saw an opportunity for revenge disguised as moral outrage. "This is a disgrace to our community," he declared at the emergency town meeting he called. "Lila Thompson has brought shame upon us all with her loose morals and sinful behavior. She refuses to name the father, which can only mean she doesn't know who he is. Such wickedness cannot be tolerated in a God-fearing community." Lila stood before the gathering of people she had known all her life, people whose children she had healed, whose ailments she had soothed, whose lives she had touched with her gentle kindness. Now they looked at her with eyes full of judgment and disgust, their faces twisted by mob mentality and moral superiority. "Please," Lila said, her voice steady despite the terror in her heart. "I know I'm unmarried, but this child was conceived in love. The father is a good man who abandoned you," Elder Grayson interrupted, his voice dripping with false piety. "A good man who left you to face the consequences of sin alone. You've been deceived, girl. And now you want us to accept the fruit of your deception." Even Lila's own family turned against her. Her uncle, who had raised her after her parents died, stood before her with tears of rage and shame streaming down his weathered face. "You've disgraced our family name," he said, his voice breaking with disappointment. "I can't have you under my roof anymore, bringing shame to our household. You've made your choice, Lila. Now you must live with the consequences." "But Uncle Samuel, please." I have nowhere to go, Lila pleaded, her hand instinctively protecting her still flat belly. That's not our concern anymore, Elder Grayson declared triumphantly. The decision is made. Lila Thompson, you are cast out from this community. You have 1 hour to gather your belongings and leave. You are no longer welcome here. As the crowd dispersed, their judgment delivered and their consciences satisfied, Lila stood alone in the community center where she had attended church suppers and harvest festivals, where she had laughed with friends and celebrated life's joys. Now it felt like a tomb of dead relationships and abandoned love. She walked home through streets where curtains twitched but no doors opened, where people she had known since childhood turned their backs rather than meet her eyes. In her small house, the sanctuary where she had found love with Ethan, she packed her few belongings into a single suitcase, her hands shaking with shock and grief. As she closed the door for the final time, Lila placed her hand on her belly and whispered to the child growing there, "We're going to be okay, little one. Your father loves us. I know he does. Somehow, we'll find our way to him, or he'll find his way back to us. Love like ours doesn't just disappear." But as she walked down the mountain path with everything she owned in one small bag, Lila couldn't know that Ethan was thousands of miles away, searching desperately for the woman who carried his heart and his child, unable to find either his love or his way back to the life that had given his existence, meaning, the cruel hand of fate had separated them, but their love and the precious life it had created would endure through trials that would test the very limits of the human spirit. Chapter 3. A Mother's Unbreakable Spirit. Winter descended like judgment itself, transforming the city into a landscape of frozen indifference. St. Agnes's mission stood as the last refuge for souls society had discarded, a place where hope wore threadbare clothes and dignity survived on prayers and determination. Lila arrived carrying nothing but a worn suitcase and a fierce resolve that her unborn child would know love, regardless of the world's rejection. The shelter teemed with the forgotten. Women whose eyes held untold stories, men mumbling conversations with ghosts, children who'd learned too early that safety was a luxury they couldn't afford. But surrender wasn't in Lila's vocabulary. Each morning before dawn, she served breakfast to fellow residents, her growing belly making every movement deliberate. She volunteered in the clinic, applying her grandmother's healing wisdom to wounds deeper than flesh. "You don't have to work, dear," Sister Margaret, the elderly nun who ran the shelter, would say gently. "You're carrying precious cargo there. This baby needs to know that its mother is strong," Lila would reply, her hands unconsciously caressing her belly, "that we don't give up, no matter how hard things get." As her pregnancy progressed, Lila faced challenges that would have broken a lesser spirit. The few jobs available to someone in her situation barely paid enough for food, let alone saving for the hospital bills that would come with childbirth. She cleaned office buildings at night, her back aching and her feet swollen, returning to the shelter in the early morning hours to rest for a few precious hours before beginning the cycle again. But in her quiet moments, when she could feel her baby moving inside her, Lila would whisper stories of love and hope. She would tell her unborn child about its father, the gentleman with kind eyes who had loved her completely, who would surely return when he learned about his child. "Your daddy is a good man, little one," she would murmur, her hands tracing circles on her belly. "He's probably searching for us right now. He promised he would come back. And I know he keeps his promises. Until then, it's just you and me against the world, and we're going to be just fine." The birth came on a night when winter showed no mercy. A blizzard raged outside St. Agnes's mission, and the city's emergency services were overwhelmed. Lila's labor began suddenly and progressed rapidly, leaving no time to reach the hospital across town through the storm-blocked streets. Sister Margaret, who had assisted in more emergency births than she cared to count, transformed the shelter's small medical room into a makeshift delivery ward. With only basic supplies and the help of 2 other women from the shelter, she prepared to bring new life into a world that seemed determined to show no kindness. The labor was brutal and complicated. Lila's small frame wasn't made for easy childbirth, and complications arose that would have been manageable in a proper hospital, but became life-threatening in their makeshift setting. For hours, she fought to bring her child safely into the world. Her screams of pain mixing with prayers for strength and deliverance. "Push, child," Sister Margaret encouraged, wiping sweat from Lila's brow. "Your baby wants to meet you." But as the night wore on, it became clear that both mother and child were in grave danger. Lila was losing too much blood, her strength fading with each contraction. The baby's heartbeat grew weaker, and Sister Margaret began to pray in earnest for a miracle. It was in the darkest hour, when death seemed ready to claim them both, that Nora chose to make her entrance into the world. She came into existence fighting, her lungs strong and her cries defiant, as if she had inherited her mother's unbreakable spirit before taking her first breath. "She's beautiful," Sister Margaret whispered, placing the tiny, perfect baby on Lila's chest. "She's absolutely perfect." Lila looked down at her daughter, Ethan's daughter, and felt her heart expand to hold a love so overwhelming it took her breath away. Nora had her father's eyes, bright and intelligent, even in these first moments of life, and her mother's determined chin. She was the physical manifestation of the love that had been conceived in that small mountain house, proof that something beautiful could emerge from even the darkest circumstances. "Hello, my angel," Lila whispered, tears streaming down her exhausted face. "Mama's here. Mama's always going to be here." But the birth had taken a terrible toll. Lila had lost so much blood that her vision blurred and her body shook with weakness. For days, she hovered between life and death, her body fighting to recover from trauma it was ill-equipped to handle. Sister Margaret watched over both mother and child, praying continuously for Lila's recovery and wondering how she would care for the infant if the worst happened. It was Nora who saved her mother's life. Every time Lila began to slip away, her daughter's cries would call her back to consciousness, back to the world of the living where she was needed. Love became stronger than death, and slowly, painfully, Lila began to heal. The years that followed were a testament to the strength of a mother's love and the resilience of the human spirit. Lila worked multiple jobs, cleaning offices at night, serving tables during lunch hours, taking in sewing when her fingers weren't too numb from exhaustion. Every penny went toward keeping them afloat, toward making sure Nora had food and clothes and a safe place to sleep, even if that place was still the charity shelter. Their life was poverty in its most grinding form, but it was also rich with love. Lila would sing to Nora every night, the same lullabies her own grandmother had sung to her. She told her daughter stories of princes and princesses, of heroes who overcame impossible odds, of love that conquered all obstacles. "Are we poor, Mama?" 3-year-old Nora asked one day, looking around their small section of the shelter that served as their home. "We're rich in the things that matter most, baby girl," Lila replied, pulling her daughter onto her lap. "We have each other. We have love. And we have hope. That makes us richer than people with all the money in the world." Lila taught Nora to read using books donated to the shelter, to count using stones they collected from the courtyard, to see beauty in a world that showed them little kindness. She instilled in her daughter a sense of dignity and self-worth that no amount of poverty could diminish. When Nora turned 5, she asked the question that had been building in her young mind for years. "Mama, where is my daddy?" Lila held her daughter close, choosing her words carefully. "Your daddy is a wonderful man who loves us very much, even though he's not here right now. Sometimes grown-ups get separated by things they can't control. But that doesn't mean the love isn't real. He would be so proud of you if he could see what a smart, brave, beautiful little girl you are. Will he come find us someday?" Nora asked with the faith that only children possess. "I believe he will," Lila replied. And despite years of silence and absence, she still meant it. "But until then, we take care of each other, okay? We're a team, you and me." As Nora grew, she began to understand their circumstances more clearly, but she never lost the dignity her mother had instilled in her. She helped with chores around the shelter, shared her toys with other children who had even less, and never complained about their situation. Her bright intelligence and warm heart made her a favorite among the shelter staff and residents alike. "That child is special," Sister Margaret often said, watching Nora help serve meals or comfort other children who were crying. "She has something in her that can't be broken." But the years of struggle were taking their toll on Lila. The constant work, the poor nutrition, the stress of trying to provide for her daughter while living in uncertainty, all accumulated in her body like a slow poison. She began to lose weight she couldn't afford to lose, to cough in a way that never seemed to get better, to move more slowly than her still young age should have warranted. Yet through it all, her love for Nora never wavered. Every sacrifice was worth it to see her daughters smile, to hear her laugh, to know that despite everything they had endured, Nora was growing into a remarkable young woman with an unbreakable spirit that matched her mother's own. On Nora's 7th birthday, celebrated with a cupcake from the shelter's kitchen and a story told by candlelight, Lila made a silent vow that would soon change everything. She would not let her daughter grow up without knowing her father's love. Somehow, someway, she would find the strength to reunite their family, even if it meant facing a world that had already rejected them once. Chapter 4. The Little Angel's Sacrifice. Dawn filtered through cracked windows, casting harsh light on a reality Nora could no longer ignore. Her mother's illness had become a living thing. She could see it in Lila's hollow cheeks, hear it in the rattling cough that blood-stained handkerchiefs couldn't silence, feel it in hands that trembled when they thought no one was watching. The whispered conversations of shelter women painted a terrifying picture. Consumption, wasting disease, maybe 6 months. Words that transformed Nora's world into a countdown she was desperate to stop. "Mama, how are you feeling today?" she asked with manufactured brightness, watching Lila struggle to hide her pain behind maternal smiles. "Better every day, Angel," Lila replied. "The lie is transparent as tissue paper." Lila turned toward her daughter with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, Angel. Mama's just a little tired, that's all." But Nora had seen her mother try to hide the blood-spotted handkerchief she kept pressed to her lips, had noticed how her mother barely ate the meager meals they shared, always insisting that Nora needed the food more than she did. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Her mother was dying, slowly but surely, and there was nothing 7-year-old Nora could do to stop it. That afternoon, while Lila rested fitfully on her cot, Nora overheard a conversation that would change everything. Sister Margaret was talking to Dr. Alvarez, the volunteer physician who visited the shelter twice a week, their voices low but not low enough to escape a child's sharp ears. "She needs proper medical care, Dr. Alvarez was saying, his voice heavy with frustration. "Tuberculosis caught this early is treatable, but not with the limited resources we have here. She needs antibiotics, proper nutrition, rest in a clean environment. Without treatment, she has maybe 6 months." "What about the child?" Sister Margaret asked, her voice thick with emotion. "The girl will be fine physically. She shows no signs of infection. But emotionally, watching her mother die will destroy something in that child that can never be repaired. She's already trying to be the adult in that relationship." Nora's small hands pressed against her mouth to keep from crying out. 6 months. Her mama had 6 months, unless she got proper medicine and care that cost money they didn't have, would never have, not with the way things were going. That night, as Lila slept restlessly beside her, Nora made a decision that would have been heartbreaking in its maturity if anyone had been there to witness it. She was going to save her mother's life, no matter what it took. The next morning, while Lila was in the shower room trying to wash away another night of fever sweats, Nora approached Sister Margaret with the determined stride of someone who had weighed all options and found her resolve. "Sister Margaret, I need to get a job," she announced, her chin raised with the dignity her mother had always taught her to maintain. The elderly nun looked down at the small girl with surprise, and something that might have been heartbreak. "Oh, sweetheart, you're too young to work. Children your age should be playing and learning, not worrying about adult responsibilities." "My mama is sick," Nora said simply. "She needs medicine, and medicine costs money. I'm small, but I'm strong and I'm smart. Someone will hire me." Sister Margaret knelt down to meet Nora at eye level, her weathered hands gentle on the child's thin shoulders. "Nora, baby, I know you want to help your mother, but there are rules about children working. It's not legal, and it's not safe." "Then I'll find work that doesn't follow rules," Nora replied with a matter-of-fact tone that was terrifying in its adult reasoning. "Mama says, when people you love are in trouble, you do whatever it takes to help them. I'm going to help my mama." The determination in those young eyes that looked so much like her father's, though neither Nora nor Sister Margaret knew it was impossible to argue with. Sister Margaret had seen enough children in desperate circumstances to recognize when a child had made an unshakable decision. It was Elena Rivera, one of the cleaning women who worked at the shelter, who provided the solution. She'd been listening to the conversation and saw something in Nora that reminded her of her own daughter at that age. fierce loyalty, and protective instinct that made her willing to sacrifice anything for family. "Sister Margaret," Elena said quietly, "my cleaning crew, we sometimes need extra hands for the big jobs." The child could help with simple tasks, organizing supplies, wiping down low surfaces. "We work early morning hours when no one's around to ask questions. She's small enough to pass for my niece if anyone does notice." "Elena." "I can't allow," Sister Margaret began. "Please," Nora interrupted, her voice breaking just slightly, revealing the child beneath the determined exterior. "I have to try. I can't just watch my mama get sicker and sicker. I have to do something, or I'll die, too, but from the inside." The raw honesty of that statement silenced both women. Here was a 7-year-old child articulating a truth that most adults never learned, that sometimes love demands action, even when that action seems impossible or inappropriate. Sister Margaret closed her eyes and prayed for guidance, then made a decision that went against every protocol and regulation she had ever followed. "All right," she said quietly, "but you wear gloves. You never touch anything that might be dangerous, and you come straight back here when the work is done. And Nora, your mother can never know about this." "She won't," Nora promised solemnly. "I'll tell her I'm helping with extra chores around the shelter." So began Nora's double life as a 7-year-old working child. Every morning at 4 o'clock, she would slip out of bed without waking her mother and meet Elena's cleaning crew outside the shelter. They worked in office buildings, hotels, and private homes throughout the wealthy part of the city, places where Nora had never imagined such luxury could exist. The work was harder than her small body was designed for, but Nora attacked each task with the fierce determination of someone fighting for their loved one's life. She organized cleaning supplies with military precision, wiped down baseboards and low surfaces that the adult cleaners couldn't reach without strain, and never complained, even when her back ached and her hands were raw from the harsh cleaning chemicals. The other women on the crew, most of them mothers themselves, were amazed by the child's work ethic and dignity. They began to slip her extra food from their own lunches, to make sure she had proper gloves and comfortable shoes, to treat her like the little sister they all wanted to protect. "That child has an old soul," Sophia, the crew supervisor, often said. "She works like someone twice her age and never asks for anything for herself." Nora saved every penny she earned, hiding the money in a small tin box she kept buried in her few belongings. Each week, she would count and recount the bills and coins, calculating how much more she needed for her mother's medicine, for better food, for a chance to save the only family she had ever known. The hardest part was watching her mother continue to deteriorate while pretending everything was normal. Lila would smile and try to hide her symptoms, and Nora would smile back and pretend she didn't notice the blood in the handkerchief or the way her mother sometimes struggled to catch her breath after climbing the shelter's single flight of stairs. "You're such a good helper, Angel," Lila would say when Nora brought her extra food she claimed to have gotten from the shelter kitchen, but had actually purchased with her cleaning wages. "What did I do to deserve such a wonderful daughter?" "You loved me, Mama," Nora would reply, curling up beside her mother in their narrow bed. "That's all I ever needed." But privately, Nora knew that love, no matter how strong, might not be enough to save her mother's life. She was 7 years old, working illegal jobs to buy medicine for a disease she barely understood, and time was running out faster than her small hands could earn money. It was during one of their cleaning jobs at a luxurious mansion that fate would intervene in ways none of them could have anticipated. As Nora worked silently in the grand foyer, organizing supplies and trying to ignore the opulence that surrounded her, she had no idea that upstairs lived a man who had been searching for 7 years for the woman who had saved his life and the child who carried his blood. The wheels of destiny were already turning, bringing together 3 lives that had been separated by circumstances beyond their control, but connected by love that neither time nor distance could destroy. Chapter 5. When Worlds Collide. The Caldwell mansion commanded its hillside like a monument to everything money could buy and nothing it couldn't. Ethan stood in his marble-floored study, surveying manicured perfection that felt increasingly like a beautiful prison. 7 years of searching had yielded nothing but expensive disappointment and the growing certainty that success meant nothing without someone to share it with. Every investigator's report, every dead-end lead, every false hope had brought him closer to accepting the impossible. Lila had vanished as completely as if she'd been conjured from dreams rather than rescued from storms. His morning conference call with Tokyo droned through complex negotiations, but hunger finally interrupted diplomacy. The intercom buzzed his request for coffee and fruit to whoever was maintaining his pristine emptiness today. 10 minutes later, a soft knock preceded an entrance that would shatter his world entirely. Instead of Mrs. Porter's familiar efficiency, a child appeared. Impossibly small hands gripping a silver tray that seemed designed for someone twice her size. Maybe it's time to accept that she's gone, his assistant, Beatrice, had suggested gently just last week. Watching him pore over another investigator's report that led nowhere, maybe it's time to try to move forward. But Ethan couldn't move forward. How could he explain that every woman he had met in the past 7 years had felt like a pale imitation of the real thing? How could he describe the way Lila's touch had healed something in him that he hadn't even known was broken? How could he make anyone understand that he had found his other half and then lost her, leaving him to walk through life feeling perpetually incomplete? The sound of the cleaning crew arriving downstairs interrupted his melancholy thoughts. It was Thursday morning, which meant Sophia's crew would be here to maintain the pristine condition of a house that felt more like a museum than a home. Ethan had learned to time his schedule around their visits, usually leaving for the office before they arrived, to avoid the reminder that other people's lives were built around serving his comfort. But this morning was different. This morning, he had an important conference call with Tokyo that couldn't be rescheduled, which meant he would be working from home while strangers moved through his space like ghosts, maintaining his beautiful, empty life. 2 hours into his conference call, Ethan realized he hadn't eaten since the previous evening. His stomach growled audibly during a particularly quiet moment in the negotiation, causing embarrassed chuckles from the other participants. "Gentlemen, let's take a 15-minute break," Ethan announced, muting his microphone and stepping away from the massive mahogany desk that had belonged to his grandfather. He pressed the intercom button that connected to the kitchen, expecting to reach Mrs. Porter, the housekeeper who usually coordinated with the cleaning crews. "Could someone bring up some coffee and perhaps some fruit to the study?" he requested, then returned to shuffling through contracts while he waited. 10 minutes later, there was a soft knock on his study door. "Come in," Ethan called without looking up from the legal documents spread across his desk. The door opened with the quiet precision of someone trying not to disturb, and Ethan glanced up, expecting to see Mrs. Porter's familiar face. Instead, he found himself looking at a Childa little girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, carrying a silver tray that seemed far too heavy for her small frame. "I brought your coffee, sir," the child said in a voice that was carefully polite, but carried an underlying tension that spoke of someone trying very hard to do everything exactly right. Ethan's first instinct was confusion. What was a child doing with his cleaning crew? But as the little girl stepped further into the room, moving with careful, measured steps toward his desk, something about her face made his breath catch in his throat. She was beautiful in the way children are beautiful, when they carry themselves with adult dignity mixed heritage, with café, olate skin, and dark hair pulled back in neat braids. But it was her eyes that stopped Ethan's heart entirely. They were his eyes, the same unusual shade of green-gray that he had inherited from his grandmother. Eyes that looked back at him from his mirror every morning. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, his voice softer than he had intended, as if speaking too loudly might frighten away this impossible vision. "Nora, sir," she replied, setting the tray down on his desk with the careful precision of someone who had been taught that breaking expensive things had consequences she couldn't afford. Nora, the name seemed to echo in his mind, like something he had heard in dreams. Ethan studied her face more intently, noting the stubborn set of her jaw that he recognized from his own childhood photographs, the way she held her shoulders back with pride, despite her obvious nervousness. "And how old are you, Nora?" he asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. "7, sir," she replied, then added with the kind of adult reasoning that broke his heart, "But I'm very responsible for my age. I won't break anything or cause any trouble." 7 years old, the same amount of time that had passed since that night in the mountains, when he had held love in his arms and then lost it to forces beyond his control. The same amount of time he had been searching for a woman whose face he saw reflected now in the features of this remarkable child. Ethan stood up slowly, his mind reeling with possibilities that seemed too incredible to believe. "Nora, could you tell me?" but his question was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass. The little girl had been reaching for what appeared to be a business card that had fallen from the tray, and in her nervousness, she had bumped against a crystal paperweight that Ethan's father had given him years ago. The expensive piece shattered against the marble floor, sending sharp fragments scattering across the room. Nora's face went white with terror. "Oh no, oh no. I'm so sorry," she whispered, immediately dropping to her knees to try to collect the broken pieces with her bare hands. "Don't touch," Ethan started to warn her, but it was too late. A sharp edge of crystal sliced across her small palm, drawing a line of bright red blood that dripped onto the expensive Persian rug. Instinct took over. Ethan rushed around his desk and knelt beside the child, his heart pounding with a protective fury that surprised him with its intensity. "Let me see your hand," he said gently, reaching for her injured palm. But Nora snatched her hand away as if his touch had burned her, scrambling backward like a wounded animal that had learned not to trust human kindness. "No," she said fiercely, pressing her bleeding hand against her small chest. "I don't need help. I can take care of myself." The rejection hit Ethan like a physical blow. Here was this child who looked like she could be his daughter, injured and in pain, and she was rejecting his help with the same fierce pride he remembered from another lifetime, another person who had mattered more than breathing. "Nora, you're hurt," Ethan said, his voice carefully gentle, as he might use with a frightened wild creature. "Please, let me help you. I have a first aid kit right here in my desk." "I said no," Nora repeated, though tears were beginning to gather in those familiar green-gray eyes. "My mama says we don't take charity from rich people who think money fixes everything. We take care of ourselves." The words hit Ethan like lightning striking in the same place twice. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he heard an echo of a similar voice, saw the shadow of a similar pride, felt the ghost of a similar dignity that refused to be bought or patronized. "Who is your mother, Nora?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as pieces of an impossible puzzle began to fit together in his mind. But before Nora could answer, Sophia's voice called from the hallway. "Nora, Mia, where are you? We need to finish the upstairs bedrooms." Nora's eyes went wide with panic. "I have to go," she said quickly, wrapping her injured hand in the small cloth she kept in her pocket for cleaning. "I'm sorry about your glass thing. I'll pay for it somehow. I promise." She started toward the door, but Ethan's voice stopped her. "Nora, wait." She turned back, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other, this successful man who had everything except what mattered most, and this wounded child who had nothing except dignity and determination. "You don't have to pay for anything," Ethan said quietly. "It was an accident. And Nora, if you ever need help, if you or your mother ever need anything, you can always come to me. Do you understand?" Something flickered across Nora's young face: confusion, hope, fear, and something else that Ethan couldn't identify. "Why would you help us?" she asked. "You don't even know us." "Because I think you might be my daughter," Ethan thought, but couldn't say. "Because you have my eyes. And your mother might be the woman I've been searching for since the day I lost my heart." Instead, he said simply, "Because everyone deserves help when they need it." Nora studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read some truth written there that she couldn't quite understand. Then Sophia's voice called again, more urgently this time, and the spell was broken. "I have to go," Nora said again. And this time, Ethan let her leave, watching as she disappeared through his study door like a vision from a dream he couldn't quite remember. After she was gone, Ethan stood alone in his marble-floored study, staring at the drops of blood on his Persian rug and feeling like the universe had just shifted around him. Somewhere in this city was a 7-year-old girl with his eyes and his stubborn chin, a child who spoke of her mother with the same protective fierceness that he remembered from another time, another place, another lifetime when love had found him in the middle of a storm. And if Nora was his daughter, then somewhere out there was Lila, his angel, his lost love, the woman he had never stopped searching for. Ethan pressed his hand against his chest, where his heart was beating so hard, he could feel it against his ribs. After 7 years of searching, after 7 years of empty success and hollow achievements, fate had just walked into his study, carrying a silver tray and bleeding on his expensive rug. The conference call with Tokyo was forgotten as Ethan reached for his phone, his hands shaking as he dialed the number for his best private investigator. This time, he had something more than memories and dreams to guide his search. This time, he had hope. Chapter 6. Wounded Pride. 3 days of obsession had transformed Ethan's normally pristine office into an investigative war room. Reports scattered across mahogany surfaces where quarterly earnings once held court, photographs of potential leads replacing merger documents. Board meetings became exercises in distraction, multi-million-dollar negotiations fading to meaningless background noise. All he could see were green-gray eyes in a child's face, stubborn dignity wrapped in second-hand clothes. The echo of a voice that spoke of pride, learned at a mother's knee. Daniel Reed had been working around the clock since Ethan's frantic call, but tracking a child who existed in the city's invisible economy proved maddeningly elusive. Cash payments, temporary workers, people who served the wealthy without ever truly being seen they inhabited. A parallel world that conventional investigations struggled to penetrate. Saturday morning brought Ethan to his study, pretending to review reports while actually memorizing every child's face glimpsed through his windows. The doorbell's chime interrupted his vigil, and he answered personally, expecting delivery notices or neighborly trivialities. Instead, he found Nora standing on his doorstep, her small hand wrapped in what appeared to be a clean but obviously reused bandage. She was wearing the same simple clothes from Thursday, but they had been carefully washed and pressed, and her hair was styled in neat braids that spoke of someone who took pride in appearance despite limited resources. "Hello, sir," she said with the careful politeness that seemed to be her default mode when dealing with adults. "I came to talk about paying for the glass thing I broke." Ethan's heart started racing immediately. Here she was, the child who had been haunting his thoughts, standing on his doorstep, like an answer to prayers he hadn't known how to pray. "Nora," he said, trying to keep his voice calm and welcoming. "Please come in." But Nora shook her head firmly. "Mama says we don't go into strangers' houses, even when they seem nice. I can talk to you from here." The mention of her mother sent another jolt through Ethan's system. "Of course," he said, stepping outside and closing the door behind him. "How is your hand?" Nora glanced down at her bandaged palm. "It's fine. Mama fixed it up real good. She knows all about healing people." "Healing people?" The words echoed in Ethan's mind, with devastating familiarity. He remembered gentle hands tending his wounds, the scent of healing herbs, a voice that sang away pain and brought peace to a broken soul. "Nora," Ethan said carefully, "what's your mother's name?" The little girl's eyes became guarded immediately. "Why do you want to know?" I'd like to thank her for raising such a polite, responsible daughter." Something in Nora's expression softened at the compliment to her mother. "Her name is Lila," she said with obvious pride. "She's the best mama in the whole world. She works really hard to take care of us." Lila. The name hit Ethan like a physical blow, confirming what his heart had known from the moment he first looked at this remarkable child. This was his daughter, and Lila's daughter, conceived in love and raised in circumstances he couldn't bear to imagine. "Nora," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion he was struggling to control, "about the crystal paperweight." "I figured out how much it costs," Nora interrupted, reaching into her small pocket and pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. "I looked it up at the library. It's a Waterford crystal, and new ones cost $450. I have $37 saved up, so I need $413 more to pay you back." Ethan stared at the piece of paper where Nora had carefully written out the calculation in precise, childish handwriting. The idea that this 7-year-old child had researched the cost of his paperweight and was planning to somehow earn over $400 to repay him was both heartbreaking and infuriating. "Nora, you don't need to." "I do need to," she said firmly. "Mama always says that when you break something that belongs to someone else, you have to make it right. It might take me a long time, but I'll pay you back every penny." "I promisa." The fierce pride in her voice, the determination in those familiar green-gray eyes, the stubborn set of her jawit was like looking at a female version of himself at that age. Combined with Lila's unshakable dignity, Ethan felt his heart breaking and soaring at the same time. "Nora, listen to me," Ethan said, kneeling down so they were at eye level. "You don't owe me anything. It was an accident, and the paperweight wasn't that important to me." "Everything in your house looks important," Nora replied matter-of-factly. "And $450 is important to anybody. That's enough money to." She stopped abruptly, as if she had been about to reveal something she wasn't supposed to say. "Enough money to what?" Ethan asked gently. Nora's eyes filled with tears. She was trying not to shed. "Nothing. It's enough money for lots of things, that's all." But Ethan could see the truth in her young face, could read the desperation she was trying so hard to hide. $450 was probably more money than this child had ever seen in one place, money that could solve problems. He was only beginning to understand. "Nora, what if I told you that you could earn that money by helping me with some things around here? Simple things, nothing dangerous or too difficult for someone your age." The hope that flashed across Nora's face was immediately replaced by suspicion. "What kind of things?" "Well," Ethan said, thinking quickly, "I have a lot of books in my library that need to be organized, and my garden could use someone to help plant flowers. Maybe you could help me with some correspondence. You seem very smart, and I bet you have beautiful handwriting." For a moment, Nora's eyes lit up with the possibility. Ethan could see her calculating in her head, figuring out how many hours of work it would take to earn the money she needed. But then her expression closed off again, and she took a step backward. "That's not really work," she said quietly. "That's charity disguised as work. Mama says rich people sometimes try to help by making up fake jobs, but it's still charity, and charity hurts people's dignity." Ethan felt like he had been slapped. "Nora, I wasn't trying to." "Yes, you were," she said with a calm certainty that was devastating in its accuracy. "You feel sorry for me because I'm poor and I broke your expensive thing. But feeling sorry for someone isn't the same as respecting them." The wisdom in those words, coming from a 7-year-old's mouth, left Ethan speechless. He could see Lila in every syllable, could hear her voice teaching their daughter that dignity was more valuable than money, that self-respect couldn't be bought or sold or given as charity. "You're right," Ethan said finally. "I was trying to help, but I was doing it wrong. I'm sorry." Nora nodded gravely, accepting his apology with the graciousness of someone far older than her years. "It's okay. Most rich people don't understand about dignity. Mama says it's not their fault, they just never had to learn." "Your mother sounds very wise," Ethan said, his heart aching with love and loss and the desperate need to find the woman who had raised this extraordinary child. "She is," Nora agreed. "She says that being poor doesn't make you less than anybody else, and being rich doesn't make you more than anybody else. We're all just people trying to figure out how to be good to each other." Ethan felt tears threatening to spill over. His child, was quoting philosophy that could have come from the world's greatest teachers, wisdom that her mother had instilled in her despite circumstances that would have broken lesser spirits. "Nora," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "would you tell me about your mother? What she's like, what she enjoys, whether she's happy?" Something flickered across Nora's fascia, shadow of worry, of fear, of secrets too heavy for such small shoulders. "Why do you want to know about my mama?" "Because she might be the woman I've loved for 7 years, Ethan thought. "Because you might be my daughter. And she might be the other half of my soul that I've been searching for since the day I lost her." But he couldn't say any of that to a 7-year-old child who was already carrying too much responsibility for her young age. "Because anyone who could raise a daughter like you must be pretty special," he said instead. Nora's smile was the first completely unguarded expression Ethan had seen from her. "She is special. She's the most beautiful, smartest, kindest person in the whole world. She works really hard, and she never complains. And she tells me stories every night that make everything seem okay, even when things are scary." "And is she healthy? Happy?" The smile faded from Nora's face, replaced by worry that no child should have to carry. "She's tired a lot," Nora said quietly. "She tries to hide it, but I can tell. And sometimes she coughs in a way that sounds bad. But she says she's fine, and I have to believe her." Her voice trailed off. "Because what?" "Because if something happened to Mama, I don't know what would happen to me," Nora whispered, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking just a little. Ethan's heart shattered completely. Here was his daughter, trying to save her mother's life with $37 and a determination that would have moved mountains if love alone could heal illness. "Nora," he said urgently, "if your mother is sick, there are doctors who could help. Good doctors who? Doctors cost money we don't have. Nora cut him off, her defenses snapping back into place. And I already told you we don't take charity. It wouldn't be charity, Ethan said desperately. It would be payment for breaking my paperweight. Yes, that's it. The paperweight was actually a family heirloom, very valuable, worth much more than $450. So really, you owe me enough that I could pay for your mother's medical care, and we'd be even. But Nora was already shaking her head, seeing through his clumsy attempt at deception with the clear eyes of a child who had learned not to trust when things seemed too good to be true. You're lying, she said simply. You're being nice, but you're lying. And Mama says that even nice lies hurt people in the end. With that, she turned and started walking down the long driveway that led away from Ethan's mansion and back to whatever desperate circumstances had brought her to his door in the first place. Nora, wait, Ethan called after her. But she didn't turn around. He stood there, watching his daughter walk away, carrying secrets and burdens that no child should bear, protected by a pride that he recognized as both her greatest strength and the wall that was keeping him from helping her. For the first time in 7 years, Ethan knew exactly where his heart belonged. But knowing and reaching were two different things, and the distance between his world and theirs felt like an ocean he didn't know how to cross. Chapter 7. Searching Hearts. Ethan's investigation consumed him with the intensity of a man racing against time he couldn't measure. His office transformed into mission control for the most important search of his life. Daniel Reed's reports carpeting surfaces where business strategies once lived, photographs of possibilities, scattered like prayers across polished wood. The cleaning service confirmed a child named Nora works occasionally with Sofia Rivera's crew. Daniel reported during their Tuesday briefing. But cash operations protect worker privacy. Many are undocumented or avoiding official systems entirely. Ethan's pacing wore grooves in expensive carpet. Medical facilities. If the child's right about her mother's illness, every hospital, clinic, and emergency room check them. No Lila Thompson on record, but poverty forces people into emergency care that keeps minimal documentation, Daniel replied. The thought of Lila, his angel, his lost love, suffering without proper medical care while he lived in luxury, made Ethan feel physically ill. How many nights had she lain awake coughing while he slept in his king-sized bed in his climate-controlled mansion? How many times had she worried about money for medicine while he spent more on a single dinner than most people earned in a month? Sir, Daniel said gently, I have to ask, are you certain this child is yours? I mean, green eyes aren't that uncommon, and children sometimes resemble people who aren't related to them. Ethan stopped pacing and looked at the investigator with eyes that held 7 years of searching and longing. Daniel, I've been looking for Lila Thompson since the day I lost her. I've never forgotten her face, her voice, the way she moved through the world with such grace and dignity. This child, Norashi, has Lila's pride, her strength, her way of seeing through to the truth of things. And she has my eyes, my stubborn chin, my grandmother's cheekbones. She's 7 years old, which means she was conceived right around the time. He stopped, unable to finish the sentence that would make his private pain public knowledge. I understand, sir, Daniel said quietly. We'll keep looking. I've got contacts at the homeless shelters, the soup kitchens, the charitable organizations. If she's in the system anywhere, we'll find her. But even as Ethan nodded his agreement, a part of him worried that Lila and Nora existed in the spaces between system sin, the invisible world of people who survived by staying unnoticed, unrecorded, unhelped by the very institutions designed to assist them. Meanwhile, across the city at St. Agnes's mission, Nora was discovering that keeping secrets from someone who loved you was far more difficult than she had imagined. She had returned from her visit to Ethan's mansion with her mind reeling from the encounter, her heart confused by emotions too complex for her 7-year-old understanding. The man, Ethan Caldwell, had learned his name from the nameplate on his desk, had been unlike any rich person she had ever imagined. He had been kind, genuinely kind, not the patronizing false kindness that adults sometimes showed children they pitied. When she had cut her hand, the concern in his eyes had been real, immediate, protective in a way that reminded her of how her mother looked at her when she was hurt. But it was more than kindness that had unsettled Nora. There had been something in Ethan's face when he looked at her. Something that made her feel recognized in a way she had never experienced before. It was as if he had been looking for her specifically, as if her presence had answered some question he had been carrying. "How was work today, Angel?" Lila asked when Nora returned to their small section of the shelter. Her voice warmed despite the exhaustion that seemed to be her constant companion now. "It was fine, Mama," Nora replied automatically. But something in her voice must have been different because Lila looked at her more closely. "Just fine? You seem thoughtful today, like you're carrying something heavy in your mind." Nora curled up beside her mother on their narrow cot, breathing in the familiar scent of herbs and healing that always surrounded Lila, despite their humble circumstances. She wanted to tell her mother about Ethan, about the strange recognition she had felt, about the way he had tried to help, and how she had rejected his charity, just as Lila had taught her to do. But she also sensed that talking about Ethan would upset her mother in ways she couldn't understand, would bring up conversations and revelations that her 7-year-old self wasn't ready to handle. "Mama," she said instead, "can I ask you about my daddy?" Lila's hands, which had been gently stroking Nora's hair, stilled for a moment. "What would you like to know, baby? What did he look like? Did he have eyes like mine?" Lila was quiet for so long that Nora wondered if she had fallen asleep. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft with memory and pain. "Yes, Angel. He had eyes exactly like yours, beautiful green-gray eyes that seemed to see right into people's hearts. And he had strong hands that were gentle when they touched you, and a smile that made you feel like you were the most important person in the world. Do you think he ever thinks about us?" "I know he does," Lila said with quiet certainty. "He loved us very much, Nora. Sometimes love isn't enough to overcome the circumstances that keep people apart, but that doesn't make the love less real. If he loved us, why didn't he come back?" Lila pulled her daughter closer, her heart breaking with the weight of questions she couldn't fully answer. "Sometimes life gets complicated in ways that have nothing to do with love. Sweetheart, your father was a good man who found himself in an impossible situation. I have to believe that if he could have come back, he would have." Nora absorbed this in the way that children do, filing away information that she would understand more fully as she grew older. But one thing was clear in her young mind. Her father was someone to be missed, not resented, someone whose absence was a tragedy rather than an abandonment. "Mama, what if someone wanted to help us? Really help us, not just charity, would you let them?" Lila's cough, which had been getting progressively worse over the past weeks, chose that moment to rack her body. She tried to muffle it in her pillow, but Nora could see the flecks of blood on the fabric when her mother thought she wasn't looking. "Baby, we help ourselves," Lila said when the coughing subsided. "That's how we maintain our dignity and our strength. We don't need anyone else's pity or handouts." But what if the person wanting to help wasn't doing it out of pity? What if they were doing it because Nora struggled to find words for feelings she didn't fully understand? What if they were doing it because they recognized something? A nurse. Lila's breath caught, and she turned to look at her daughter with eyes that suddenly seemed very alert despite her illness. "Nora, why are you asking these questions? Did something happen today that you haven't told me about?" For a moment, Nora balanced on the edge of confession. She could tell her mother about Ethan, about the way he had looked at her, as if he had been searching for her his whole life, about the kindness in his voice when he said her name, about the desperate way he had wanted to help them. But then she remembered her mother's pride, the lessons about dignity that had been drummed into her since birth, the way Lila's face closed off whenever the topic of charity or pity arose. She couldn't bear the thought of seeing disappointment or shame in her mother's eyes. "No, Mama," she lied, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "I was just wondering, that's all." But Lila was not fooled. She had raised this remarkable child, had watched her grow from an infant into a young person with wisdom beyond her years. She knew when Nora was holding back, knew when her daughter was carrying secrets that were too heavy for such small shoulders. "Angel," Lila said gently, "you know you can tell me anything, right? Whatever it is, whatever happened, we'll face it together." Nora nodded, but she couldn't bring herself to reveal the truth. How could she explain that she had met a man who made her feel things she had no words for, who looked at her with recognition and longing, who had eyes the same color as her own and seemed to carry sadness that matched what she sometimes saw in her mother's face? Instead, she snuggled closer to Lila and listened to her mother's labored breathing, counting each breath like a prayer, and wishing desperately that love alone could heal the sickness that was slowly stealing her mother away from her. That night, as Nora lay awake listening to her mother's fitful sleep, She made a decision that would have consequences neither of them could imagine. Tomorrow, she would go back to Ethan Caldwell's mansion not to ask for charity, not to accept his help, but to look into those familiar green-gray eyes and try to understand why meeting him had felt like finding a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing. Across the city, Ethan stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the lights of a city that held his heart somewhere in its sprawling darkness. Somewhere out there was a woman he had never stopped loving and a child who carried his blood in her mother's unbreakable spirit. Tomorrow, he would find them. Tomorrow, he would begin to make up for 7 years of separation and silence. Tomorrow, he would bring his family home. Chapter 8. The Weight of Truth. Truth arrived in fragments, whispered through Nora's restless sleep, pieces of a puzzle that Lila's heart had been assembling without her mind's permission. Dawn found her watching her daughter's peaceful face while wrestling with impossible possibilities that felt too miraculous to be real. "Green eyes like mine," Nora had murmured in dreams. "Kind man wanted to help. Ethan." The name shattered 7 years of carefully maintained hope, sending shockwaves through Lila's system that had nothing to do with her illness. Ethan, the man who'd promised to return. Who'd vanished so completely, she'd sometimes wondered if storm love had been a mere fever. Dream could fate be so precisely cruel and kind? Could the man Nora encountered during her desperate work be the same Ethan who'd given Lila love, purpose, and the precious child sleeping beside her? Details aligned with devastating clarity. A wealthy businessman in a mansion, someone who'd looked at Nora with inexplicable recognition, eyes the exact shade of their daughter's inherited gaze. Could it be possible? Could the man Nora had met during her cleaning work be the same Ethan who had held Lila in his arms during that storm-torn night 7 years ago? The timing seemed too perfect, too much like the kind of miracle that happened in stories but never in real life. But as Lila lay there in the pre-dawn darkness, pieces began to fall into place with devastating clarity. Nora's description of a rich man who lived in a mansion, who had tried to help her with genuine kindness rather than patronizing charity. A man who had looked at her daughter with recognition, who had green-gray eyes, the same unusual shade as Nora's own. Most telling of all was Nora's reaction to him. Her daughter, who was naturally suspicious of strangers and fiercely protective of their dignity, had spoken of this man with a confusion that suggested she had felt some connection she couldn't understand. It was as if some part of her had recognized him, even though she had never seen him before in her conscious memory. Lila's hands trembled as she pulled her thin shawl more tightly around her shoulders. If this Ethan was her Ethan, then he was also Nora's father, the father who had never known his daughter existed, who had been searching for them while they struggled to survive just miles away from his luxurious world. The irony was so profound, it took her breath away. While she'd been cast out from her village for carrying his child, while she had given birth in a charity shelter and raised their daughter in poverty, Ethan had been living in wealth and comfort, never knowing that his love had created the most precious gift in the world. But alongside the hope that threatened to overwhelm her came a fear so deep it made her chest tighten with more than just her illness. What would Ethan do when he learned the truth? Would he try to take Nora away from her, claiming that his wealth could provide better opportunities than her love? Would he see their daughter as an inconvenient reminder of a past he preferred to forget? And perhaps most terrifying of all, what would happen to Nora if Lila's illness claimed her before she could ensure her daughter's future? Would it be better for Nora to know her father and potentially lose her mother, or to remain ignorant of her parentage and face an uncertain future in the foster care system? Lila's cough, which had been getting progressively worse over the past weeks, chose that moment to rack her body with spasms that left her gasping for breath and tasting blood. She pressed her face into her pillow to muffle the sound, not wanting to wake Nora, but she could feel her strength ebbing with each passing day. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. She was dying. The tuberculosis that she had been fighting with herbs, prayers, and stubborn determination was winning, and unless she received proper medical treatment soon, Nora would be left alone in the world. As dawn broke over the city, painting the shelter's windows with pale gold light, Lila made a decision that would change everything. She had to find a way to contact Ethan, to tell him about their daughter, to give Nora the chance to know her father before it was too late. But how could a woman living in a charity shelter reach a wealthy businessman who probably lived behind gates and security systems designed to keep people like her at a distance? How could she prove to him that she was the woman he had known 7 years ago, that their daughter was truly his child? Meanwhile, across the city, Ethan was facing his own moment of terrible clarity. He had spent the night poring over the investigative reports, studying every photograph and document his team had compiled, and the evidence was becoming undeniable. Nora was his daughter, and Lila was somewhere in this city, struggling with circumstances he had been too privileged to imagine. The breakthrough had come from an unlikely source. Mrs. Porter, his housekeeper, had mentioned in passing that Sophia's cleaning crew often hired helpers from St. Agnes's Mission, a shelter downtown that served homeless families and single mothers in crisis. Poor little thing, Mrs. Porter had said when Ethan asked about Nora. Sophia says the child works harder than most adults, never complains, always sends her money home to her sick mother. Breaks your heart, really, seeing someone so young carrying such heavy burdens. St. Agnes Mission. Ethan had driven past the building countless times without ever really seeing a tone of those invisible institutions that served the city's forgotten population. Now it took on significance that made his chest tight with emotion and regret. His daughter, his flesh and blood, was living in a homeless shelter while he slept in a mansion with rooms he never used. The woman he had loved completely, the woman he had searched for with increasing desperation, had been struggling for survival while he attended charity galas and complained about the emptiness of his privileged existence. Ethan's phone rang, interrupting his tortured thoughts. Daniel's voice came through with the exhausted satisfaction of someone who had finally found what he'd been looking for. "Sir, I found her, Lila Thompson, age 31, currently residing at St. Agnes's Mission, with her 7-year-old daughter, Nora. She's been there for over 6 years, working part-time jobs when her health permits. No record of the child's father on any official documents." Ethan's heart was pounding so hard he could barely hear Daniel's words. "Is she? How is she?" "Sir, I have to be honest with you. The word from the shelter staff is that she's not well. Chronic cough, significant weight loss, all the signs of someone who's been fighting a serious illness without proper medical care. They're concerned about her, especially with winter coming." The room seemed to spin around Ethan as the full weight of the situation hit him. Lila, his angel, his lost love, was dying while he had been living in luxury. Their daughter was working illegal jobs to try to save her mother's life, while he complained about the meaninglessness of his wealth. "Daniel," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, "I need you to find out everything about her condition, what kind of medical care she needs, which doctors specialize in her illness, what it would cost to get her the best treatment available." "Sir, are you planning to—" "I'm planning to save her life," Ethan interrupted. "And then I'm going to spend the rest of my life making up for 7 years of not being there when they needed me." But even as Ethan spoke those words, he knew the situation was far more complicated than simply throwing money at the problem. Nora's fierce rejection of his charity had shown him that dignity was more important to this family than financial assistance. He couldn't simply storm into their lives with his wealth and expect to be welcomed as a savior. He needed a plan, a way to help them that preserved their pride while ensuring they got the care and support they desperately needed. Most importantly, he needed to find a way to tell Lila that he had never stopped searching for her, that losing her had been the greatest tragedy of his life, that he was ready to spend forever making up for the circumstances that had kept them apart. As Ethan sat in his marble-floored office, surrounded by the trappings of success that felt meaningless compared to the family he had found and lost and found again, he began to formulate a plan that would require all of his business acumen and every ounce of his love. He would start by ensuring Lila received the medical care she needed, but he would do it in a way that preserved her dignity and independence. He would find a way to support Nora's education and future without making her feel like a charity case. And most importantly, he would find a way to win back the love of the woman who had saved his life and given him the greatest gift of all, a daughter who carried both of their strengths and all of their love. The thought of seeing Lila again, of looking into her eyes and telling her that he had never forgotten her, that he had been searching for her since the day he lost her, made Ethan's hands shake with anticipation and terror. What if she no longer loved him? What if 7 years of struggle and disappointment had killed the feelings they had shared? What if she blamed him for not finding her sooner, for not being there when she needed him most? But stronger than his fear was his love that had survived 7 years of separation and would survive whatever challenges lay ahead. He had found his family, and nothing, not pride, not fear, not the vast differences in their circumstances would keep him from fighting for them with everything he had. Tomorrow, he would begin the most important negotiation of his life, winning back the hearts of the woman and child who had always belonged to him, even when he didn't know they existed. Chapter 9. Angels in Disguise. Miracles, Lila had learned, sometimes arrived disguised as ordinary Tuesday mornings. Dawn brought the familiar symphony of shelter sounds. Whispered prayers, muffled coughs, the rustle of lives lived in communal desperation. But when Sister Margaret approached with unusual excitement lighting her weathered features, the day's trajectory shifted toward the impossible. "Child, I've received the most extraordinary call," Sister Margaret began, settling beside Lila's cot with barely contained enthusiasm. "Grace General Hospital has launched a revolutionary program, comprehensive respiratory care for uninsured families, completely funded by an anonymous benefactor." Lila's automatic skepticism kicked in. 7 years of broken promises had taught her to distrust good news that seemed too perfect. "Sister, programs like that always have strings attached." "No strings. Dr. Emily Wong, their pulmonary chief, wants to see you today. Transportation, diagnostics, treatment, aftercare, everything covered. The donor specifically requested to help single mothers with children." The precision of that description made Lila's pulse quicken. Not just any familiar single mothers with children, someone who understood their exact circumstances, their specific vulnerabilities. "Yesterday evening, I received a call from Grace General Hospital," Sister Margaret continued, her voice carrying an excitement that made Lila pay closer attention. "They have a new program for treating uninsured patients with serious respiratory conditions, fully funded by an anonymous donor. No questions asked, no paperwork beyond basic medical information." "Sister, that sounds too good to." "It's real, Lila. I spoke with Dr. Emily Wong, the head of their pulmonary department. She wants to see you today, as soon as possible. They'll provide transportation, full diagnostic workup, treatment plan, everything." Lila's heart began to race, hope and fear roaring in her chest. "What's the catch?" "There's always a catch with these programs." "No catch," Sister Margaret said, her own voice thick with emotion. "Just someone with means and heart who wants to help people get the medical care they need." Dr. Wong said the donor was very specific. "They want to help families with children, especially single mothers who are struggling to survive." It was as if the universe had heard Nora's desperate prayers and decided to intervene. Lila closed her eyes and tried to process the possibility that her daughter might not have to watch her mother die after all. "But Nora," Lila said suddenly, panic replacing hope, "I can't leave her here alone, and I can't take her to a hospital where she might be exposed to." "Already arranged," Sister Margaret interrupted with a smile. "There's an excellent childcare program at the hospital for families receiving treatment, educational activities, proper meals, supervised by qualified staff. Nora will be safe and cared for while you get the help you need." 2 hours later, Lila found herself sitting in the most luxurious medical facility she had ever seen. Grace General's new wing was pristine and modern, with artwork on the walls and comfortable furniture that made her feel like she was in a high-end hotel rather than a hospital. The staff treated her with a respect and kindness that made her wonder if this was all some elaborate dream. Dr. Emily Wong was a small, efficient woman in her 40s, whose competence was immediately apparent in everything from her firm handshake to the way she reviewed Lila's symptoms with focused attention. "Based on what Sister Margaret has told me in my preliminary examination, I'm quite certain you have tuberculosis, Dr. Wong said without sugarcoating the diagnosis. "The good news is that TB is completely curable with proper treatment. The challenging news is that you've been fighting this infection for months without medication, which means your body is severely compromised." "How long will treatment take?" Lila asked, her mind immediately going to practical concerns. "I have a daughter who depends on me, and I can't afford to be away from work for—" "Miss Thompson," Dr. Wong interrupted gently, "I need you to understand something. Without treatment, this disease will kill you within a matter of months. With treatment, you can expect to make a complete recovery and live a normal, healthy life. The choice isn't between convenience and inconvenience, it's between life and death." The words hit Lila like a physical blow. She had known she was sick, had felt her strength ebbing day by day, but hearing it stated so bluntly made the reality impossible to ignore. "The initial treatment phase will require you to stay here for approximately 2 weeks," doctor," Wang continued. "We need to get your infection under control and ensure you're not contagious before you can return to close contact with your daughter. After that, you'll be on oral medications for about 6 months, with regular checkups to monitor your progress." 2 weeks, Lila repeated, her mind reeling. "I can't afford 2 weeks in a hospital. I don't have insurance. I can't pay." "Miss Thompson, please listen to me, Doc," Wang said firmly. "This program covers everything. Hospital stay, medications, follow-up care, even meals and accommodation for your daughter. The donor who established this program was very specific. No patient should have to choose between financial ruin and life-saving treatment." Meanwhile, in the hospital's children's area, Nora was experiencing her own mixture of wonder and worry. The childcare facility was unlike anything she had ever seen. Bright and cheerful, with books and educational games, healthy snacks served at regular intervals, and staff members who seemed genuinely interested in the children's well-being. "Your mama is going to get better," said Mrs. Garcia, the program coordinator who had been assigned to Nora's case. "Doctor, Wang is one of the best doctors in the city, and the medicine they're giving your mother has helped lots of people get completely well." Nora nodded solemnly, though part of her was still afraid to believe that such good fortune could be real. In her 7 years of life, she had learned that promises were fragile things that broke easily under the weight of harsh circumstances. But as the days passed and Lila's condition began to improve dramatically, Nora started to allow herself to hope. Her mother's color returned, the terrible coughing subsided, and for the first time in months, Lila began to look like the vibrant, beautiful woman she had been before. Illness began to claim her. "I feel stronger every day," Lila told Nora during one of their daily visits. "Doctor, Wang says the antibiotics are working exactly as they should. In another week, I'll be able to come home." "Home to the shelter?" Nora asked. Though she tried to keep the disappointment out of her voice, Lila's expression grew thoughtful. "Actually, Angel, there's something else. The program includes temporary housing assistance for families during the recovery period. They have small apartments available for patients who need a clean, quiet environment to complete their treatment." The apartment, when they saw it, was modest, but seemed like a palace compared to their section of the shelter. 1 bedroom, a small living area, a kitchenette where Lila could prepare healthy meals, and, most miraculously of all, their own bathroom with a shower that had unlimited hot water. "Is this really ours?" Nora asked, running her hands over furniture that wasn't worn or broken, looking out windows that were clean and uncracked. "For the next 6 months while I finish my treatment," Lila replied, her voice thick with emotion. "And after that, well, Doctor, Wang says the program also includes job placement assistance for people who are ready to work again." But even as their circumstances improved beyond anything they had dared to hope for, both Lila and Nora carried questions they couldn't quite articulate. The generosity they were experiencing seemed too perfect, too precisely tailored to their exact needs, too much like the intervention of someone who knew exactly what they required. "Mama," Nora said one evening as they shared dinner at their own small table, "do you think the person who's helping us might be someone we know?" Lila paused with her fork halfway to her mouth, her heart racing at the possibility that had been growing in her mind since the first day of treatment. "Why do you ask that, Angel?" "I don't know," Nora said slowly. "It just feels like whoever is doing this cares about us in a special way, not just helping because they're nice people, but helping because they want us to be okay. Specifically." The wisdom in her daughter's observation took Lila's breath away. Nora was right. This level of comprehensive care, this attention to their specific needs, this perfect timing when Lila's illness had reached a crisis, it felt personal in a way that random charity never could. "If someone we knew was helping us," Lila said carefully, "how would you feel about that?" Nora considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "I think I'd want to say thank you," she said finally, "and I'd want to know why they were hiding instead of just being honest about caring about us." That night, as Nora slept peacefully in her own bed for the first time in her life, Lila stood at their apartment window, looking out at the city lights, and wondering if somewhere in that sprawling darkness was the man she had never stopped, loving the man who might have found them at last and was now watching over them like a guardian angel who preferred remain invisible. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. If Ethan was behind their miraculous rescue, it meant he had been searching for them, had cared enough to move heaven and earth to ensure their well-being, but it also meant he knew about Nora, knew he had a daughter he had never met, and was choosing to help them from the shadows rather than stepping forward to claim his place in their lives. Tomorrow, Lila decided, she would find a way to discover the truth. Their lives had been saved by someone's generosity, but she needed to know whether that someone was the love of her life, finally keeping the promise he had made 7 years ago in a small mountain house during a storm that had changed everything. If Ethan was their mysterious benefactor, then it was time for hiding to end and for their family to finally be complete. Chapter 10. Love's Ultimate Recognition. 3 weeks into her miraculous recovery, Lila carried certainty like a flame that warmed and terrified in equal measure. Her health had improved beyond all medical expectations, but questions burned brighter than gratitude. The anonymous generosity saving her life felt too personal, too precisely crafted for their specific needs. Doctor Wong had let slip details that made Lila's heart race. A businessman donor who took unusual interest in single mothers with children, who specifically asked about cases involving daughters around 7 years old, someone who understood the terror of children watching parents die from treatable diseases. The revelation struck like lightning. Ethan Caldwell, the man whose name graced the charity foundation funding her treatment, the same Ethan who'd held her during a storm 7 years ago, who'd promised to return, who'd vanished so completely. She'd sometimes wondered if love that profound could be real. But more than finding her, he'd been protecting them in secret, ensuring their survival, while respecting the pride that had always defined her. "Mama, you look like you've discovered something important," Nora observed with the perceptiveness that never failed to amaze Lila. The words hit Lila like lightning. A businessman interested in single mothers with 7-year-old children. Someone who understood the specific terror of a child watching a parent die. Someone who had the resources and motivation to create an entire medical program just to ensure one family received the care they needed. That evening, as Nora worked on homework at their small kitchen table, real homework from the excellent tutoring program that had mysteriously been offered to her as part of their benefits, Package Lila made a decision that would change everything. "Angel," she said, sitting down beside her daughter, "I need to ask you something important. When you met that man at the mansion, the one who tried to help you, can you remember exactly what he looked like?" Nora set down her pencil and closed her eyes, accessing the detailed memory that children possess when something makes a strong impression. He was tall, with dark hair that had a little bit of gray at the sides. He had kind eyes that were the same color as mine, and when he smiled, it made me feel safe, like he would never let anything bad happen to me if he could help it. "And did he tell you his full name?" "Ethan Caldwell," Nora said immediately. It was on a nameplate on his desk, and he had lots of important-looking papers with that name on them. Ethan Caldwell, the name that had haunted Lila's dreams for 7 years, the name that belonged to the man who had promised to return for her and then vanished like smoke in the wind. Now she knew with absolute certainty that he was alive, successful, and had somehow found them after all these years of separation. But more than that, he had been helping them in secret, ensuring their survival and recovery while remaining hidden in the shadows. It was exactly the kind of thing the Ethan she remembered would do. Generous, protective, but respectful of their pride and independence. "Mama, you look like you've seen a ghost," Nora said, her young face filled with concern. "Did I say something wrong?" "No, Angel. You said something exactly right." Lila pulled her daughter into her arms, her heart racing with a mixture of joy and terror. "How would you feel about meeting him again? Officially, I mean. If we went to see him and talked to him properly?" Nora's eyes lit up with the hope she had been carrying secretly in her heart. "Do you think he really wants to help us? Not just because he feels sorry for us, but because he actually cares about what happens to us. I think," Lila said carefully, "that he might care about us more than we ever imagined possible." 2 days later, Lila learned that Ethan's mansion would be hosting a charity gala for the Children's Medical Foundation, the very organization that had funded her treatment program. The irony was so profound it took her breath away. Ethan had been hiding in plain sight, using his wealth and influence to help families like theirs, while never stepping forward to claim credit or recognition. But Lila's strength, though improved, was still fragile. The walk from their apartment to the wealthy Hillcrest district where Ethan lived, was longer and more demanding than her recovering body could easily handle. By the time she and Nora reached the gates of the Caldwell mansion, Lila was struggling to stay upright, her face pale, and her hands shaking with exhaustion. "Mama, you don't look good," Nora said, her voice tight with worry. "Maybe we should go back home and try this another day." "No, Angel," Lila replied, though her voice was weak. "I've waited 7 years for this moment. I won't wait another day." The mansion was ablaze with lights. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, and elegantly dressed guests moved through the grand foyer like figures from a fairy tale. Lila and Nora, in their simple but clean clothes, felt like intruders from another world as they made their way around to the back gardens, where the overflow from the party had spilled onto the manicured lawns. It was there, beside a fountain illuminated by fairy lights, that Lila's strength finally gave out completely. She collapsed onto a marble bench, her breathing labored and her vision blurring with the exhaustion of physical and emotional strain that had finally overwhelmed her body's limited reserves. "Mama," Nora cried, kneeling beside her mother with tears streaming down her face. "Mama, please don't leave me. Please don't die now when we're so close." The sound of Nora's distress carried across the garden, reaching the ears of a man who had been standing at his study window, looking out at his charity gala and wondering why success still felt like emptiness, even when he was surrounded by 300 of the city's most influential people. Ethan rushed through his mansion and out into the garden, his heart pounding with alarm at the sound of a child in distress. But when he reached the fountain and saw the figures huddled, there a woman collapsed on the bench, and a small girl crying beside her, his world tilted off its axis entirely. Even in the dim light of the garden, even with 7 years of separation and illness having changed her appearance, Ethan knew her immediately. Lila's Angel, the woman he had searched for desperately. The woman whose face had haunted his dreams, and whose memory had made every other relationship feel like a pale imitation of real love. "Lila," he whispered, her name falling from his lips like a prayer answered after years of desperate petitioning. She looked up at him with eyes that held recognition, love, pain, and hope, all mingled together in an expression that took his breath away. "Ethan," she replied, and hearing his name spoken in her voice was like hearing music after years of silence. "You saved me," Ethan said, kneeling beside the bench where she sat, his hands reaching out to touch her face, as if to convince himself she was real. "You saved my life, and then you vanished. And I've been searching for you ever since." "I didn't vanish," Lila replied, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was cast out, rejected. I had nowhere to go and no way to find you." It was then that Ethan truly looked at Nora, really looked at her, seeing not just the familiar features he had noticed before, but understanding their significance with the clarity that comes from truth, finally revealed. "She's mine," he said, his voice filled with wonder, pain, and overwhelming love. "She's our daughter." "Yes," Lila whispered. "Her name is Nora, and she's 7 years old, and she's the most beautiful, brave, wonderful child who ever lived." Ethan turned to Nora, who was watching this exchange with eyes wide with confusion and hope. "Nora," he said gently, "do you know who I am?" "You're the man who tried to help me," she replied, her voice small but steady. "You're the man with eyes like mine." "I am your father," Ethan said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I'm your father, and I've been looking for you and your mother since before you were born. I never knew I had a daughter, and if I had known, nothing in this world could have kept me away from you." The impact of this revelation hit Nora like a physical blow. She looked back and forth between her mother and Ethan, pieces of a puzzle she had carried her whole life, suddenly clicking into place. "You're my daddy," she whispered. "The daddy who has eyes like mine and hands that are gentle and a smile that makes people feel important." "Yes, Angel," Ethan said, using the same endearment that Lila had always called their daughter. "I'm your daddy. And I love you more than I have words to express. I love you and your mother more than life itself." The reunion exploded through them like a dam burst, releasing 7 years of suppressed longing. Ethan's arms encompassed his entire world, the woman who'd saved his soul and the daughter who embodied their love, holding his family for the first time, while feeling pieces of himself, finally, completely whole. "I never stopped looking." He whispered against Lila's hair, breathing in the scent that had haunted his dreams. "Every day, every resource, Every prayer I searched for you both. You found us, Lila replied, her voice breaking with tears of joy, relief, and love too long contained. You kept your promise. You came back. Nora, processing revelations that rewrote her entire understanding of herself, looked between her parents with wonder and dawning comprehension. So, we're really a family? The kind that lives together and eats dinner together and nobody has to bleed for money anymore? Ethan's laugh mixed tears with pure joy, his heart shattering and healing simultaneously. Yes, Angel, we're a family that will never be separated again. Your only job from now on is being the extraordinary child you are playing, learning, laughing, letting your parents protect and cherish you forever. And Mama won't be sick anymore? Your Mama is going to get the best medical care in the world, Ethan promised. She's going to be completely healthy, and we're going to make sure she stays that way forever. As the three of them sat together in the garden, surrounded by the sounds of the charity gala that had unknowingly brought them together, Ethan made vows that would shape the rest of their lives. He would spend every day making up for the years they had lost. He would ensure that Lila never wanted for anything, that Nora never doubted her worth or her security, that their love story would have the happy ending that had seemed impossible for so long. I have so much to tell you, Ethan said to Lila, his hand caressing her face with the tenderness of 7 years of longing, about searching for you, about the investigation, about how I never gave up hope that someday I would find you again. And I have so much to tell you, Lila replied, about raising our daughter, about the strength I found in loving you even when you weren't there, about the pride I took in knowing that Nora was half of the most wonderful man I had ever known. But we have time now, Ethan said, looking at his family, his wife in everything but law, his daughter who carried his eyes and her mother's courage. We have all the time in the world to tell each other everything. We have the rest of our lives to be the family we were always meant to be. As the stars emerged overhead and the charity gala continued in the mansion behind them, 3 hearts that had been separated by circumstance but never by love finally beat in unison. Love had conquered pride. Wealth had found its purpose. And a family that had been broken by fate had been made whole by the unbreakable bonds that connect soul to soul across time, space, and every obstacle that life can create. Ethan Caldwell had spent 7 years searching for his heart. Now he had found it, along with the greatest treasure of all, a love that had created life, survived separation, and would endure for all eternity. They were home finally, completely, forever home.